You spend years in vet school learning the science, the anatomy, the pharmacology, the surgery, but then you hit the floor on day one and suddenly the hardest part of your day isn't the medicine. It's the client crying in room two, the schedule falling apart, and that voice in your head wondering if you're actually cut out for this. Welcome back to the Veterinary Business Podcast. I'm your host for this session, Don Adeesha. And today we are talking about how to bridge that gap. I'm joined by Dr. Angela Henninger. She's a vet and multi-practice owner who's currently getting her MBA, and she started DVM Ascent to help new doctors navigate everything they didn't teach you in school, like leadership, conflict, and actually building a career that doesn't burn you out by year 3. Dr. Henninger, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Many new veterinarians enter practice with strong medical knowledge, but still struggle with confidence. Where do you see the biggest gap between veterinary school and real world practice show up?
I think that you have so much knowledge, leaving vet school, and then maybe uncertainty of how to actually use it or apply it in practice. Like you said in your intro, it's like all of a sudden, the textbook is closed and the client's in front of you, and there's a lot of second guessing applying what you actually know. So, I think only time can help with that, and mentorship. The problem is having mentorship be delivered in the way it was promised or consistently, or that it's actually available, and I think that's a big part of the gap between learning and doing is, how do you have someone you can ask questions to make sure you're applying what you know appropriately?
How do you find someone to ask those questions?
Right. Well, sometimes it's luck and other times it's a platform like I developed, so it's online. And it's mobile accessible. So you basically have mentorship in your pocket. So if you have a question or you need help, you can reach out on the platform in real time. So when those clients are in the exam room, there doesn't have to be a panic asking Google, not sure what selection to pick on Google. We have peer groups, mentors in the app where you reach out, you get answers to a question, and then hopefully that is the goal is that leads to confidence, that repetition and that day-to-day support.
Now, do you believe confidence is a personality trait, or is it something that can be tracked and measured?
Yeah, I think in my MBA, they taught us, you can't really change intelligence or personality. And so I think confidence can be taught if people hone in on the right communication skills. However, you're never going to change somebody's personality. And a lot of veterinarians are introverted, right? And so this having client interactions constantly can be empty their tank really quick, right? And especially when you're having these, conflicts arise, with upset clients, emotional clients, you have to have this emotional resilience to avoid burnout. And some people's personalities, aren't equipped to that. And that's where, certain skills come in to really help them. It doesn't mean you can't be a veterinarian if you're not the best. It just means you need more practice, right? And so we're developing labs, interactions where people can do communication practice in real time. And hopefully that sort of instant gratification and will lead to confidence where they don't have to keep running into the same fear of conflict or are running out of steam. By the end of the day, the last appointment, you don't have any energy left. So, I think practice literally makes perfect when it comes to that.
Communication labs. That's a very interesting concept.
It's so fun.
Now, you've grown from practicing veterinarian to multi-location practice owner. So, Dr. Henninger, what leadership lessons did you have to learn the hard way, and what do you wish someone had taught you earlier?
Yeah, I think it's to relax and have perspective And sometimes, unfortunately, perspective can't be taught. It can only be learned. And sometimes it's, the hard way. I think early on in my career, I was very type A perfectionist. And I sort of expected of others of what I expected for myself. And I think doing things, there's not one way. And I think that was my mentality. And I really focused on tasks versus people. I think now, having someone told me that, I would have learned a lot easier. But I think I would share with young leaders that if someone shared with me, like, the people are what matters most, right? Their input, asking questions. I wish I would have asked more questions of people, because of that comes really great ideas, and I think trying to take on a lot of success or completion of goals myself, and sort of this delegation model really was exhausting, and I think that at one point in my career, I, really honed in on my communication skills, and then not only use those in my interactions with clients, but also with my direct reports. And so instead of like barking out orders, I would stop myself and ask somebody about themselves or how they are, or what they did this weekend, right? So I think like everyone was a little taken aback at that getting to know our conversation versus just sort of barking out orders. And so, but of that, getting to know people, it develops rapport. It builds a bond. People are much more likely to be collaborative and work towards common goals than if they're just told what to do. So I think focus on, building relationships is really important in leadership. I wish somebody probably would have told me that earlier, instead of me thinking leadership was like task driven. It's like so much more of an inspirational thing,
That sounds a bit of a distinction between leadership and management. Would you?
Yes.
Okay. So
I think both are important, right? And so, but I think if leaders are trying to manage, they're missing the mark. I think, there's information and there's inspiration, and, what you're giving to those that are, working with you is, ultimately gonna make or break your results. And, if you're a leader that's managing, that's not really probably going to get you to the end goal or inspire your people to do their best work.
what's possibly the hardest conversation you've ever had to have as a leader that actually made you a better person?
Well, I think difficult conversations where I step back and instead of trying to get my point across, I'm more did open-ended questions. And I recently at VMG Congress heard Kwame Christian speak, and he talked about, you should do about 20% of the talking or less and 80% of the listening. And I think conversations where I really stop to hear the other person instead of trying to get my point across, changed the outcome of the conversation and made me a better leader, a better communicator.
It's a very interesting perspective, conversating while majorly listening in.
Right. By listening, yeah, you hear a lot more than when you're speaking. I said, that's why you have 2 ears and one mouth. You're supposed to listen more than you talk.
Yeah, that simple advice, but definitely it's something that has proven the test of time to be so true over and over again.
Practice. I mean, it's a skill, right? It definitely takes practice.
Now, communication is often treated like a soft skill, but in practice, it can determine the outcomes with clients, teams, patient care. So, what communication skills should every veterinarian actively develop?
Yeah, so early in my career, Pfizer partnered with the Frank Communication, and I became a facilitator for that content, and that made a huge difference. I mean, the way I communicated prior and then after, and then I taught others, and you could see the difference. And it's really focused on open-ended questions, focusing on nonverbals, empathy statement, and reflective listening. I mean, I think if a veterinarian or anybody, I used to Frank, my family, we joked, use it at home, but, really focusing on on those 4 skills makes conversations so much more productive. And I think the fear of some is, if I focus on that, the conversation will take longer. And really, there's sort of this like open-ended funnel effect where studies have shown that it's actually makes conversations and interactions much more efficient and thus shorter, and does save time when you focus on 4 skills, and leads to better, I think, client interaction and patient outcomes, because you're really focusing on the information and how you're obtaining it.
Speaking of how you're obtaining information, with the rise of AI generated instructions, how can vets ensure that they don't lose human connection that builds that client trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think really, without getting political, keeping that veterinary client-patient relationship in-house and in person, I mean, it really does need to be where our relationships are built with our clients face-to-face, with the pet in the room. I think AI is a great tool for efficiency. And, things you used to have to look up or type are really at your fingertips now, and saves your AI scribes recording conversations and not having to type all your notes, and, utilizing things for client handouts where you used to have to type. It makes, you much more thorough, and the client much more informed. So I think using the skills while the patient and client are in the exam room is the important part, not replacing it.
Being an MBA candidate, how has the business language of your degree changed the way you talk to your medical team?
I think it's helped me put language and a framework to things I was already doing. And it's like, oh, okay, when, we're doing team building and the environment is, where people can find their purpose, do their best work, right? That's culture. Things like me putting a name to what we're doing and then communicating that to my team has probably been the biggest difference. I've really enjoyed putting a name to a face, probably, of what we're doing, than a face to a name. But so yeah, definitely, it's given me frameworks to lead much more intentionally.
Okay. One last question while we hover on the topic is that frontline staff often feel vets overpromise to clients. How do you teach a vet to communicate boundaries without sounding dismissive?
Right. So I think we try to set expectations in client-facing marketing, so what are hours of operations? What sort of interactions we'll accept and what we don't. We don't accept verbal abuse, signage, in our hospital, in the exam rooms, kind of, explaining if we're using AI scribes or things like that, So I think we try to inform our clients. And so then if somebody is emotionally charged, part of that emotional resilience skill is setting boundaries. So we're going to communicate respectively both ways. And the demand is going to be within business hours. Not going to be expected, to respond at 8 p.m. at night when we're closed. So I think really establishing criteria for care becomes really important with the clients, and saying to new veterinarians, like, it's okay to set boundaries. Like, there's no guilt in that, right? It will lead to less burnout, less compassion fatigue for sure. And then standing strong on that and speaking up for yourself if those boundaries aren't followed or respected.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henninger. Now, I would like to pause here for a moment. That's such an important point, since communication really does shape so much of what happens in a veterinary practice. How clients understand your recommendations, how your team works together, and even how people in your community perceive the value of your care. And there's another layer to this, that many practice owners don't always have the time to step back and look at. How clearly is your practice communicating its value before a client ever walks through the door? Because you may have a strong team, excellent medicine, and great client experience, but if pet owners in your local market are not finding you, understanding what makes you different, or choosing you for the right reason, growth can still feel harder than it used to. Than it should. So that's why for a limited number of Veterinary Business Podcast listeners, Echo Marketing, our growth partner, is offering a complimentary one-on-one marketing strategy meeting. The team takes time beforehand to look at your practice, your local market, your online presence, and where there may be some missed opportunities to attract the right clients more intentionally. So if today's conversation is making you think about confidence, leadership, communication, and the future direction of your practice, this is a practical next step to get more clarity. You can go ahead and reserve your complimentary marketing strategy meeting at veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. I'll repeat that one more time. veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. Now, Dr. Henninger, I'd love to build on communication theme and move into something every veterinarian team faces at some point: conflict. So, conflict is unavoidable in veterinary medicine with clients, co-workers, leadership, and even amongst ourselves. So, how can emotional intelligence really help veterinarians manage conflict without burning out?
Yeah, I think really honing in on, not suppressing emotions, but learning how to use them or communicate with somebody who doesn't have it. This is it a skill? I don't know, but so I really think emotional intelligence is something that you set boundaries and you hold to them. You don't suppress things, but you certainly don't lash out. So I think certain skills like learning how to respond versus react, learning to listen versus just speak, those are so important. I think if people really stay grounded in their convictions and what they're going to accept and what they're not, it leads to much more satisfaction, and sustainability.
Speaking of learning to listen, do you have any tips for us?
Counting, breathing. I think those are all important. And really, really in the communication I teach, it's like the power of the pause, right? I think sometimes people feel the need to fill the gap of silence, and sometimes that's okay just to embrace, a gap in the conversation.
Hey, now, given the high rates of compassion fatigue in 2024 industry reports, what do you think about emotional intelligence being a tool for the patient's benefit, or is it actually a survival tool for the doctor?
Yeah, I think reacting, getting emotionally charged, and not focusing or having developed emotional intelligence does affect patient outcomes, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're combative with the owner, the patient suffers, right? It's like they're the ones that aren't going to get the care. So I think a lot goes into another skill is shared decision making. I think shared decision making does help de-escalate some people's emotion, especially when it comes to cost and as it relates to compliance. I think it's okay not to do the gold standard of care with every patient. I think that spectrum of care, it's a newer approach, right, is something that can help with emotional resilience, because there's more of a collaborative effort to reach a solution, right? People mostly come in with a problem and then, they got to find out what's wrong with their pet, but they're worried about affordability and they're scared, so I think along with emotional intelligence, really honing on skills that have the owner build trust really is going to help avoid some of those high tense interactions.
How do you personally recharge your emotional battery after one of those high intense days?
It's like a lot of wine, I think. I think it's important for self-care, and it sounds really like cliche, but really, like, I think finding things where people can decompress, whether it be, reading a book, watching a show. I love reality TV. So, just focusing on something that doesn't take much brain power to recharge your tank, making sure you're getting enough sleep. Meditation, I use the Calm app. I actually really like their programs. And the EMDR now, it's supposed to just help calm people's nervous system. So I think, finding something after and putting the work to the side, not taking it home with you. I think that's also a commitment. So I think that self-care, I think, I try to do all those things. I travel. So I think finding something that a hobby or something that allows you to decompress is really important.
Now, through DVM Ascent, you're building support beyond clinical training. What does meaningful mentorship look like for early career I apologize for this, Dr. Henninger. I'm having a bit of a mushroom out there today, and our editor is going to have a great time with this. So
the early career veterinarian. I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, allow me one more time to repeat that question for you. Through DVM Ascent, you're building support beyond clinical training. What does meaningful mentorship look like for early career DVMs, and how can practices create environments where young veterinarians actually thrive?
I think being really intentional with what their first 6 months is going to look like. I think having a plan from day one, we create a 90-day checklist that the mentor-mentee work with together. We have skills that are interjected in a new graduate roadmap. It actually lays out their first year. First things to focus on in the 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, what programs to use, what to pop in your groups and talk about, being vulnerable. I think really creating a safe space with an intentional, structured format that allows flexibility in and out, right? Because we're not expecting perfection in the process, and it has to be fluid. So I think people setting up a schedule, somebody said, what should we do with this new grad? Just throw them into rooms? And I'm like, oh my God, no, that's like the worst thing you could do. I think watch one, do one, teach one. Having a structure like our new graduate roadmap, 90-day checklist, those are all important things to set a new graduate in particular up to be successful for sure.
You mentioned they're being vulnerable. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of, like you said in the beginning, like even like second guessing, imposter syndrome, like am I really doing this? Am I really qualified to do that? So I think there has to be the vulnerability piece where you feel okay asking questions. I think a lot of people will start to feel shame in not knowing. And so I think it's important to have a safe space. That's why we created Ascent. It's something that the members can drive their own success by using the resources and the people. And it's a peer-to-peer mentorship. It's experienced veterinarians, and it's a place to be open and honest if you don't know and not get any toxic feedback. So long answer short, I think vulnerability means like you feel comfortable not knowing. You feel comfortable instead of shame in asking questions, and multiple questions. I think some people are like, oh my God, I already asked 5 questions today. It's like there's no question limit, So, so I would say that's what vulnerability means to me is just being open and honest and transparent with either how you're feeling or not knowing.
Okay. So, Dr. Henninger, just to wrap things out over here, if you could go back to your first day in practice and give yourself one piece of advice about your future, what would it be?
I would say, don't be afraid to ask questions. Know where to find the answers, and just know that sometimes confidence only comes with experience, and that only comes with time. So don't focus on being perfect. Focus on your purpose, why you got into it, your why, being progressive, and learning and building those things every day, and not putting pressure on yourself to be perfect. I think that that's the biggest thing that can create a lot of stress and burnout, is that, drive for perfection. I think just focusing on one skill at a time and developing confidence over time, and not being afraid to ask for help when you need it.
Dr. Henninger, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
So our website is dvmascent.com. They can reach me at email, info@dvmascent.com. So I'm available on the platform or by email to answer questions about the platform or just help. I'm a mentor, obviously, on the platform, and I'm in the groups. So, I respond to cases and things like that. So.
Dr. Angela Henninger, thank you so much for joining us today. Listeners, one last reminder, if this conversation made you think about the future of your own practice, how you're growing, don't forget that Echo Marketing is offering a complimentary one-on-one marketing strategy meeting for a limited number of Veterinary Business Podcast listeners. So it's a chance to step back, look at your practice's digital presence, your local market, the opportunities that may be available to help you grow with more clarity and intention. You can reserve your spot at veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. I'll repeat that one last time, veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. Thank you everyone for listening in. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.